Have you ever noticed how everyone treats buying a house like it's the ultimate sign you've made it? Your parents ask when you're finally going to stop throwing money away on rent. Your friends post their closing day photos like they just won the lottery. Society basically tells you that if you're not a homeowner, you're falling behind. But here's what nobody talks about. For millions of people, renting is actually the smarter financial move. And I don't mean temporarily smarter, I mean genuinely, mathematically, life-changingly better for building wealth. Here at Simple Money, we've analyzed the actual numbers behind homeownership versus renting, and what we found challenges everything you've been told. Today, I'm going to reveal why the rent versus buy decision isn't what you think it is, and why some of the wealthiest, savviest people you know choose to rent on purpose. Let's talk about what's really happening when you buy a house, because the story you've been sold is missing some pretty major details. Think about the last time someone told you renting was throwing money away. They probably said something like, when you rent, you're just paying someone else's mortgage. When you own, you're building equity. Sounds logical, right? Here's the problem. That's only half the story, and the missing half changes everything. When you own a home, you're not just building equity. You're also spending money that disappears forever, just like rent. Property taxes? Gone. Homeowner's insurance? Gone. That new roof after 15 years? The HVAC system that dies? The foundation repair? All gone. But here's where it gets really interesting. Most people have no idea how much of their mortgage payment is actually interest, especially in those early years. Let me give you a specific example. On a $300,000 mortgage at 7% interest, your monthly payment is about $2,000. Guess how much of that first payment goes toward actually owning more of your house? About $500. The other $1,500? That's interest. Money that disappears exactly like rent. For the first 10 years of a 30-year mortgage, you're paying more in interest than you're building in equity. That's not me being negative. That's just how amortization works. The math doesn't care about your feelings. Now, here's what makes this even more insidious. We've been conditioned to think of homeownership as an investment. But investments are supposed to generate returns without requiring constant maintenance, repairs, and upgrades. Your index fund doesn't need a new roof. Your retirement account doesn't require a fresh coat of paint every 5 years. A house isn't really an investment. It's a product you're buying. One that costs money to maintain, depreciates without upkeep, and ties up hundreds of thousands of dollars of your wealth in a single, illiquid asset that you can't sell quickly if you need to. The first major advantage of renting is what I call the flexibility premium, and it's worth way more than most people realize. Here's the thing. Your 20s and 30s are when your earning potential grows the fastest. This is when you're supposed to be taking career risks, moving for opportunities, switching industries if something isn't working. This is your highest growth phase. But when you own a home, every one of those opportunities comes with a massive financial anchor. New job in a different city? Cool. That'll be 6% of your home's value in realtor fees to sell it. We're talking $18,000 on a $300,000 home. Just gone. That's before we even talk about moving costs, potential losses if the market is down, or the sheer time and stress of selling. Think about it this way. Imagine you're playing a video game where your character can either move freely around the map, or they can plant a flag that gives them a small bonus but reduces their movement speed by 70%. Most strategic players would keep moving, especially in the early game when positioning matters most. That's exactly what homeownership does to your career mobility. And in an economy where the average person changes jobs every 4 years, and where career advancement often requires geographic flexibility, that immobility has a real cost. Here's a real example. My friend Jake bought a house right after college. Cute starter home, seemed like a smart move. 3 years later, he got offered an incredible opportunity. Dream company, 40% raise, but it was across the country. He had to turn it down. Why? Because selling his house would have meant losing money. The market had softened. He hadn't built much equity yet, and the transaction costs would have wiped out what little he had gained. Meanwhile, his colleague who was renting, she negotiated a relocation bonus, moved in 3 weeks, and took the job. 5 years later, she's making twice what Jake makes. And that salary difference? It compounds for the rest of her career. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in lifetime earnings. The flexibility to move for opportunity, isn't just a nice to have. It's one of the most valuable financial assets you can maintain in your career building years. The second reason renting can be smarter is what I call the opportunity cost trap. This one is sneaky because it's invisible. When you buy a house, you're not just committing to a mortgage payment. You're locking up a massive amount of capital in your down payment. 20% down on a $300,000 house? That's $60,000. Gone from your liquid assets. Sitting in your walls? Now, here's what nobody wants to admit. That $60,000 could be working for you in the stock market. Historically, the stock market returns about 10% annually. Your home? About 3 to 4% after you account for maintenance, property taxes, and insurance. Let me make this concrete. Take that $60,000 down payment. Invest it in a simple index fund instead. In 30 years, at 10% annual returns, that becomes more than $1 million. $1,040,000 to be exact. Your $300,000 house, appreciating at 4% annually, it's worth about $970,000 in 30 years. Sounds good, right? Except you didn't pay $300,000 for it. You paid that $300,000 plus all the interest on your mortgage. At 7% interest over 30 years, you actually paid around $720,000 total. So your house appreciated to $970,000, but you paid $720,000 to own it. Your actual gain? About $250,000 before we subtract maintenance costs, property taxes, and insurance. Meanwhile, your renter friend who invested that down payment, they turned $60,000 into over $1 million. And they still have all the money they saved by not paying property taxes, insurance, and maintenance over those 30 years. Money they could also invest. I know what you're thinking, but the renter had to pay rent all those years. True, but remember, the homeowner was also paying interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. For a $300,000 home, those costs often equal or exceed what rent would be for a comparable property, especially in the first 15 years of the mortgage. The math is uncomfortable, but it's still math. Here's the third advantage. I call it the maintenance freedom factor. And it's worth actual dollars, not just convenience. When you own a home, you're essentially running a small business, a business that requires constant attention, unexpected expenses, and skilled labor to maintain. Except unlike a real business, this one never generates revenue. It only costs money. The water heater dies at 11 p.m. on a Saturday? That's your problem. $3,000, right now. The roof starts leaking? $8,000 to $15,000. Foundation issues? $20,000 or more. And here's the thing about home maintenance. It's not if these things will happen. It's when. Financial experts estimate you should budget 1 to 2% of your home's value annually for maintenance and repairs. On a $300,000 house, that's $3,000 to $6,000 per year. Every single year. And that's just for routine stuff. Major replacements and repairs come on top of that. But here's what makes this even worse. These aren't scheduled expenses you can plan for. They're random, unpredictable. A hot water heater doesn't care that you just had to replace your car's transmission. The AC doesn't care that you're saving for your kid's college fund. When you rent, every single one of these expenses is someone else's problem. Your landlord's problem. That $3,000 water heater replacement? One phone call, and it's handled. You didn't touch your emergency fund. You didn't use your credit card. You didn't spend your Saturday at Home Depot trying to figure out if you need a 50-gallon or 60-gallon unit. This isn't just about convenience. It's about financial stability. Homeowners face a constant barrage of unexpected expenses that drain savings and create financial stress. Renters can actually build their emergency funds and investment accounts because they're not constantly getting hit with surprise repair bills. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was so proud when she bought her first house. She'd saved up a solid emergency fund, had her down payment, everything looked great on paper. Within the first year, her HVAC system died. $7,000. 6 months later, she discovered foundation cracks. $18,000. Her emergency fund? Completely wiped out. She ended up taking on credit card debt just to cover the repairs. Now she's trapped. She can't sell because she hasn't built enough equity to cover the repairs she's made plus the realtor fees. She can't afford to keep the house because every month brings new anxiety about what might break next. And she definitely can't take that job opportunity in another city because she's financially underwater. The fourth reason is what I call the hidden cost reality, and this is where the rent is throwing money away argument completely falls apart. People love to say renters are throwing money away. But let's actually add up what homeowners throw away every single month. Money that's just gone, exactly like rent. Mortgage interest in those early years? 70 to 80% of your payment. Property taxes? In many states, that's another $400 to $800 a month. Homeowners insurance? Another $100 to $200 monthly. HOA fees if you have them? Could be anything from $50 to $500 a month. Maintenance and repairs? Average that out, and you're looking at another $200 to $500 monthly. Add it all up. On that $300,000 house, you might be throwing away $2,000 or more every month. Money that's gone forever, just like rent. But here's the thing. You could rent a comparable property for maybe $1,800 to $2,200 in most markets. And that's it. No surprise expenses, no property tax increases, no insurance premium hikes, no, oh no, the roof is leaking moments. So who's really throwing money away? The renter who pays a fixed, predictable amount? Or the homeowner who's paying thousands in interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance while pretending it's all an investment? The math doesn't lie. In the first 10 to 15 years of homeownership, you're often throwing away more money than a renter would pay for the same property. The difference is, the homeowner doesn't think of it as waste because it's wrapped up in the mythology of homeownership. The fifth advantage, and this one might blow your mind, is what I call the wealth diversification benefit. Here's something uncomfortable. For most homeowners, 60 to 70% of their entire net worth is sitting in one asset, their house, one single property, in one specific neighborhood, in one particular city. That's not wealth building. That's concentration risk. And it's the exact opposite of what every financial advisor tells you to do with your investments. Think about it. You would never put 70% of your retirement savings into one stock, right? That would be insane. But somehow, putting 70% of your net worth into one house in one location is considered responsible and mature. Here's what this really means. Your financial future is now tied to one neighborhood's prospects. If your city's major employer leaves, your wealth takes a hit. If crime increases in your area, your wealth decreases. If the school district declines, your property value drops. If they build a highway near your house, your investment suffers. Renters who invest their down payment money and their saved maintenance costs in diversified index funds, they own tiny pieces of hundreds of companies across dozens of industries in multiple countries. When one sector struggles, others thrive. When one region faces economic trouble, others prosper. That's actual wealth building. Diversified, liquid, growing through compound returns. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The psychological attachment to homeownership is so strong that it overrides basic financial logic. We've been told our whole lives that owning a home is the foundation of wealth. But for the wealthiest people, real estate is usually their smallest asset class. Their money is in businesses, stocks, and bonds, things that generate actual returns without requiring them to fix toilets. Now, let's go deeper. Because there's an uncomfortable truth about homeownership that connects to something much bigger about how we think about money and success. The real reason everyone pushes homeownership isn't actually about building wealth. It's about conformity and control. Think about when the modern obsession with homeownership really took off. Post-World War II. The government explicitly promoted homeownership as a way to create stable, predictable communities. People who own homes are less likely to move. Less likely to strike or protest because they can't risk losing their jobs and their house. More likely to care about property values and vote for policies that maintain the status quo. Homeownership was social engineering disguised as financial advice. And it worked so well that we still believe it 75 years later, even though the economic reality has completely changed. In the 1950s, the average house cost roughly 2 to 3 times the average annual income. Today, it's closer to 6 to 8 times annual income in most markets, and way higher in expensive cities. The math that made homeownership a good deal then simply doesn't work anymore for many people. But we're still operating on those old assumptions, still shaming renters, still acting like homeownership is the only path to financial security. Even though the data increasingly shows that many long-term renters who invest aggressively end up wealthier than comparable homeowners, here's what I've discovered after watching hundreds of people navigate this decision. The ones who build real wealth don't follow conventional wisdom blindly. They run the actual numbers for their specific situation. They consider their career trajectory. They think about opportunity costs. They value flexibility and liquidity. And sometimes, they choose to rent. Not because they're failing at adulting, not because they can't afford to buy, but because they've done the math and realized that for their situation, renting lets them build more wealth, faster, with less stress. Let me tell you about two people who made different choices. Both stories are real. I've just changed the names. There's Mike. Mike bought a house at 26. He was so excited. His parents were proud. He felt like he'd accomplished something huge. He got a decent deal, put 20% down, locked in a reasonable mortgage. But here's what Mike didn't anticipate. 2 years later, his industry started shifting. Remote work was becoming normal. Opportunities were opening up all over the country. His friends who rented were jumping to new companies, negotiating huge raises, taking calculated career risks. Mike, he was stuck. Not because he lacked ambition or skills, but because selling his house would mean taking a loss. He hadn't built much equity yet. Transaction costs would eat up most of what he had gained, so he stayed in his comfortable but low-growth job, stayed in his city, stayed on his original career trajectory. Fast forward 10 years. Mike's house has appreciated nicely, about 35%. Sounds great. But his career? It's grown at maybe 20% over that decade because he couldn't move for better opportunities. He's made some progress, sure, but he's nowhere near where he could have been. And here's the kicker. All his net worth is in that house. He has a small retirement account, minimal liquid savings. He's house rich and cash poor. If he loses his job, he's in trouble within months. He can't easily sell, can't easily borrow against the equity without taking on more debt. His wealth is trapped. Now let me tell you about Rachel. Rachel's the same age as Mike, same starting point, same income level. But Rachel chose to rent. Her friends gave her grief about it. Her parents worried she wasn't being responsible. But Rachel ran the numbers. She took what would have been her down payment, about $55,000, and invested it in index funds. She chose a nice rental for about $200 less per month than Mike's total housing costs once you factored in his property taxes, insurance, and average maintenance. That $200 difference? She invested that too, every single month. 3 years in, Rachel got recruited by a company in another city. 40% salary bump. She was packed and moved within a month. 2 years after that, another opportunity. 30% raise. She took it. Her savings and investments kept growing because she wasn't losing money to realtor fees, she wasn't hemorrhaging cash on unexpected repairs, and she wasn't stuck in one location. 10 years later, Rachel's invested down payment has more than doubled. Her consistent monthly investing has built up a significant portfolio. Her salary has nearly tripled because she was free to pursue the best opportunities. Her net worth is substantially higher than Mike's. And here's the important part. It's liquid, diversified, working for her every day through compound returns. If she lost her job tomorrow, she'd be fine for over a year without touching her retirement accounts. She has options, freedom, flexibility, and yes, wealth. The difference between Mike and Rachel wasn't intelligence, work ethic, or luck. It was one decision about rent versus buy, and that decision cascaded into completely different financial trajectories. Here's what most people don't realize. The rent versus buy decision isn't actually about housing. It's about liquidity versus immobility, cash flow versus equity, flexibility versus permanence. And in today's economy, where career advancement requires mobility, where opportunities emerge suddenly, where industries shift rapidly, liquidity and flexibility are worth more than we've been taught to believe. The people who thrive financially in modern America aren't always the ones who follow the traditional script of buy a house, stay put, slowly build equity. They're increasingly the ones who maintain flexibility, invest aggressively in liquid assets, and move strategically for opportunities. It's not that home ownership is always wrong. It's that we've been taught it's always right, and that's simply not true anymore. Here's the reframe. Renting isn't failing to own. it's choosing liquidity, choosing flexibility, choosing to invest your wealth in assets that work for you rather than assets you have to work for. When you rent, you're not throwing money away. You're buying freedom. Freedom from repair costs. Freedom from property taxes that only go up. Freedom from being trapped in one location. Freedom to pursue opportunities without financial anchors. Freedom to invest in diversified assets that compound over time. The question isn't whether you can afford to buy. The question is whether you can afford the opportunity cost of buying. Can you afford to have your wealth locked up in one illiquid asset? Can you afford to lose career mobility during your peak earning years? Can you afford the constant drain of maintenance, repairs, taxes, and insurance? For many people, especially in their 20s and 30s, the honest answer is no. They can't afford those costs. Not if they want to maximize their lifetime wealth. The flexibility premium, the opportunity cost trap, the maintenance freedom factor, the hidden cost reality, and the wealth diversification benefit. These aren't excuses for renting. They're legitimate financial advantages that can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in lifetime wealth. Once you see the actual math, once you understand the real costs on both sides, you can't unsee it. You start to realize that the societal pressure to buy isn't based on current economic reality. It's based on outdated assumptions from a different era. And here's the empowering part. Once you understand this, you're free to make the decision that actually works for your situation, not the decision society expects. Not the decision that makes your parents proud. The decision that builds the most wealth and creates the most opportunity for your specific circumstances. Maybe that's buying. In some situations, with some career paths, in some markets, at some life stages, buying absolutely makes sense. But maybe it's renting. And if it is, you can make that choice confidently, without shame, knowing you're not falling behind. You're actually playing a smarter game. The question isn't whether you should rent or buy. The question is, are you making the decision based on actual math and your real situation? Or are you making it based on what you've been told you're supposed to do?